and you're good to go.
Okay.
Thanks, Siggy.
Okay. Thanks for having me. My name is Ziggy Godomsky. I'm the president of the Wood Energy Technical Training Program in British Columbia, and I've been asked to do uh, seeing red. So looking stuff that you should be looking for when you're doing a solid fuel inspection. Uh, I'm not sure how much we're going to go through tonight, but I got a bunch of info on here, so we can keep going until time runs out. So seeing red is what the name of my uh, program is. And there's my contact information if anybody needs to get a hold of me. Got my phone number, my email address. And what we're gonna, like I say, what we're gonna go into today is, you know, basically descriptions of the various products and the associated standards numbers, which are very important. There's a lot of product out there that's not certified for the Canadian market, even though it has all kinds of numbers and logos and everything else and labels and stuff like that. So I'll show you what has to be on there. Uh, in BC, we've got a new building code now. It's taken effect sometime this month, if I'm not mistaken, or already has. So that's a 2024 building code. So everything we do in this business is based on the building code or with the blessing of the building code. So the building code references are CSA B365. So the CSA B365 is our installation code for solid fuel burning appliances. And as you can see up there, if any of you guys have one, you probably got an earlier edition. This is a reaffirmed one since 2022. So we made a few changes to the B365 in the last couple of years. And the way it works is if you make any changes, then you got to come up with a new document. A new document's about 180 bucks. So we kind of pushed not to make it. So if you make amendments, but you limit your amendments to 3, then they don't have to print a new document and they just put a reaffirmation on your screen. So that's why you got reaffirmed 2022. So we'll go over some of the changes that we got in B365 because some of them may hit home for a lot of you guys. So in B365, for instance, you got CSA B366. That's our standard for central systems, furnaces, boilers, heaters. A lot of people call them outdoor boilers. But there aren't that many outdoor hydronic or outdoor boilers. For the most part, they're naturally, atmospherically pressurized, so they're not a boiler. So we call them hydronic heaters. Then our ULCS 610 is factory-built fireplaces. 627 is for space heaters. 628 is for fireplace inserts and hearth-mount stoves. 629 is factory-built chimneys. 632 is heat shields. We won't discuss heat shields today. 635 for lining systems for existing chimney, and 639 for fireplace liners for existing chimneys, or for new construction, I should say. Or sorry, I kind of running ahead of myself. 639 is a firebox, a metal firebox. So if you build a masonry chimney with fire brick, that's a masonry chimney to building code. But if you're going to build that masonry chimney using a steel liner, then that steel liner has to be certified to ULCS 639. And I'll show you some pictures of that here. 640 is the liners for new construction. 641 is our standard for flue pipes and wall pass-throughs. And then we got a couple of new ones since last year. ULC S609 for pellet vent. So some of you might be familiar with this. This is a vent for an oil furnace, stainless steel inner liner, galvanized outer. B vent looks identical, except it's aluminum inside for gas and propane. But the change we've made to the ULCS 609 standards, we split it in 2 sections, one for positive pressure, one for negative pressure. So if you're hooking up a vent on an oil furnace, this is what you're going to be using. But you can also use this for pellet stoves, pellet appliances. Thing is, that has to be a positive pressure test on it. It's still called a ULCS 609 vent, but for pellet, usually you're going to have O-ring gaskets, high temp gaskets, or rope gaskets in the old days. So when you put a pellet vent together, it has to be sealed, and because it's under positive pressure, whereas with an oil furnace, it's natural draft. So that's what these things are about. Some of the new stuff in the amendment is we finally, after over 15 years, we have a standard for pellet appliances. It's ASTM E1509. That standard's been around for a long time in the US. That's the American standard for pellet appliances. And we finally accepted that on the Canadian market. A lot of you guys are doing, inspections of pellet burning appliances in your areas, and it's been a nightmare because if you had ASTM E1509 as a label on your label, that wasn't recognized in Canada, so it was an uncertified appliance. And pretty much every manufacturer that services the North American market has ASTM on their labels. In Canada, we had ULC S627 as a pellet stove. The problem is, um, there is no requirement, or there is no testing or marking in the ULC S627 standard for the ember pad. So that's why when you look at pellet stoves in the last, 10 over 10 years now, um, a lot of them are asking for an 18-inch hearth extension in the front, 8 inches on the sides and rear, whereas the Americans are usually around 6 and 1. And we used to do that because we used to have a standard in Canada for pellet stoves, and that was ULC 1482, ORD 1482. ORD is just other reference document, and ORD only has a lifespan of 5 years. If nothing's done with that in 5 years, like it's potential for making it into a standard, if it's a good idea, we'll try it for a few years. If we like it, then we make it an official standard. The last ORD we had was probably in the 90s. So the 5-year term on it is long gone. So even though the testing was there, nobody was testing to it because it wasn't recognized in Canada. So it just been a nightmare for pellet stoves. So finally we got the 1509 as accepted here in Canada. The other thing we stuck on there, I mean, this was, you know, generally noted, but a lot of people had an issue with regards to using the B365 for certified appliances. So we had to put this clause in there, the requirements of this code for uncertified appliances and equipment. So that means that if you have an uncertified appliance, this is where you're using the clearances from B365. Other than that, if it's a certified appliance, you got to go to the manufacturer's instructions. The B365 clearances do not apply to certified appliances. It seems like common sense, but it was apparently it was an issue with interpretation for a lot of people, so we had to stick it in there. And so that's what that's about. And then it's always been the authority having jurisdiction. You can't write a code or a standard to take into account every type of installation there is. So the only one who can deviate from a code or standard is the authority having jurisdiction. We are just private individuals. We can say this is this, and that, but the only guy who can put down in writing that this is acceptable is the authority having jurisdiction. So sometimes you may have to go through that. And I got to caution people on this clause here. A lot of people will go to the authority having jurisdiction and say, "Hey, can we get away with this?" And the inspector will say, "Sure, no problem. Okay, that's fine and good, but where's your documentation?" So now somebody else comes in there and does an inspection at a later date, or later year, or whatever, and says, "Well, this is not compliant." And the homeowner says, "Oh, no, we had that approved by the building department." Well, where's the paperwork, ma'am, sir? Okay. In this business, you got to cover your butt. And if there's something that the code says that's done differently, but you had approval from the authority, if it's not in writing, it was never done, right? Uh, if it's worth saying, you should be able to put it in writing. If somebody says something and doesn't want to give you something in writing, then should be a little bit suspect, right? So that's what that's all about. So this is basically the general requirements in B365. All these standards, because the building code references the B365 and B365 references all these standards, these are applicable in this country, right? So let's just run through some of these. So this is a pellet appliance, so pellet stove. Pellet stoves, you're still going to see lots of the existing ones because the ASTM has only been approved in Canada for the last couple of years. And there's a little bit of, like the ASTM has been on appliances for a long time. Do we go and do an inspection of a pellet stove, and if it's got ASTM and no ULC, is that okay? There's some little discussion going on with ULC to see when we can start approving, or how far back we can use the ASTM as being recognized here, even though officially we only recognized it here a couple of years ago. So new appliances, if they're ASTM E1509 since 2022, no problem. But you might have to look for some help from authority having jurisdiction or insurance company to see if they'll accept an older one that doesn't have a ULC on it. So we'll get rid of the ULC S627 on the next batch of pellet stoves that are being manufactured and tested, because we don't need it, because it'll all be 1509. So that's the kind of the latest and greatest on pellet stoves, and it's been a big pain in the butt. One of the things with the pellet stove is that 30 years ago, they made a big killing in this country, in North America, the world. Everybody wanted a pellet stove, and then all of a sudden, it's all like overnight they dropped dead. So we were working on all these standards and codes, and then when the market kind of disappeared, why waste our time on it? So nobody carried on. And then 15, 20 years ago, when you start making pellet stoves again, and now they're like computers, nobody followed up with doing or carrying on with the codes and standards. So it's been quite a journey to get ASTM recognized here in Canada. So then we got our factory built fireplaces. These have to meet the ULCS 610 standard. Now, we've had factory built fireplaces in this country for a long time. But if you're into looking at fireplaces from the 80s and that, for instance, you might see a label on them that says UL 127. Thing is, that's an American standard. We did not really start into our 610 standards. But if you're looking at a label and it doesn't say ULCS 610 on a factory built fireplace, it's not certified for the Canadian market. We, like I said before, as private individuals, we don't have the right to shut anybody down. So if somebody doesn't have the appropriate label, you can't say, ma'am, sir, you got to stop burning. That's the law. We are not the law. All we're doing is going out, doing an inspection and marking down what's right, what's wrong. And then it's up to the customer whether they want to accept it or not. We're not the police to tell people what they can or can't do in their own home. So that's why it's important that you got to document everything. Okay. So the definition here is a fireplace and its specific chimney components. And that's a magic word here, because the chimney, most of the chimney that we're using on factory built fireplaces in its generic form is only good for oil and gas. But if a manufacturer chooses to test their fireplace with that ULCS 604 chimney, it now becomes part of a ULCS 610 system. So every manufacturer's installation instructions will tell you what chimney you can put on this fireplace. And the rationale behind that is one of the main things. You're looking at a chimney. They're all tested to the same standard, the same, like a ULCS 604 chimney for oil and gas is tested to 1 30-minute chimney fire. So room temperature to 2100 degrees for 2100 for half an hour. So a fireplace, if it passes that temperature, if they got that kind of temperature, you're laughing. And most of them do. But what the problem is there's all kinds of chimney on the market with different kind of insulation. So therefore different weights, different sizes. There's a big difference between putting a 6-inch chimney on a fireplace and an 8-inch. That 8-inch is going to be a lot heavier. So in the manufacturer's instructions, they will specifically state how much chimney you can put, minimum chimney you can put, or maximum chimney you can put, how much weight this fireplace will support. So it's very critical if you're doing an inspection of a factory built fireplace. You can't do one without a manual. You're not going to get any information on a label to help you out with that. So the other thing is they are often erroneously referred to as zero clearance fireplaces. There is no such thing as a zero clearance fireplace. It's zero clearance to the standoffs. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I'm just going to go through, I'll go through the chimney first. What kind of chimney does a fireplace need and why? Well, this is out of one manufacturer's installation instructions. This model fireplace must be installed with one of the chimney systems listed in the chimney section in this manual. So it'll specify which chimney you can put on there. Problem is, when you're doing an inspection of a chimney, the chances of seeing a label are slim, very slim. And we were trying to push to get the labeling to be more permanent, even though that's what it says in the standard. The label's got to be permanent. But the problem is we have a CSA standard and a UL standard for labeling, and both of them say the exact same thing. You got to test a chimney label to, I'm just going to throw some numbers, minus 100 degrees and plus 1,000 degrees. And, so it's got to pass. but both standards or codes have a note. It says, note, after doing these tests, the legibility may be affected. So what the heck's the point in putting a piece of paper on a chimney that's outside and the ultraviolet dissolves the ink and you can't read it anymore? And so that's been a major problem for a lot of years. Standards Council of Canada and ANSI have kind of restricted us for that. And now they've kind of lessened the restrictions. So if there's something that has to do with our industry, we can ask for more. So all of a sudden we figure, hey, we're going to go with this flow here. And we tried to come up with another idea for how to make these things more permanent. Pretty hard thing to do because it all costs money. We've had some manufacturers that were willing to laser etch their information on their chimney, but if the other guys are willing to do that too, because they're not prepared to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to laser etch their chimney when the other manufacturers ain't going to cough up that money as well. So this industry is, you think we've been around for a long time, we've been burning with wood since the dawn of time, but trying to get things to work properly in this industry, really, it doesn't happen all that often. So from that point of view, we have a problem. So when it comes to these chimneys, you're going to have two kinds of chimney on a fireplace. This here is an air-cooled chimney. Okay, you can notice here that you got the air holes. So what happens here is this chase, manufacturers are going to give you a minimum size of the chase that has to be. And what happens is when you're using this fireplace, you got a fire in the firebox, that fire is heating up. It goes through a stainless steel liner inside this galvanized outer shell. So usually there's a couple inches of airspace in there. That stainless steel liner is going to get hot. The heat radiates or conducts through that stainless steel liner into that airspace. That air heats up, expands, air expands, gets more buoyant, starts to rise. So that air goes out below the chimney cap on top, and more cold air comes inside in here. And that's what actually cools your chimney, okay? You still got to maintain the clearances and all that kind of stuff. So the only chimney you can stick on this particular fireplace is that particular chimney. You can't mix and match these things, okay? The other way of looking at it here, if you don't do things to code with chimney, you could end up with problems. So you can't take this particular air-cooled chimney and slap it on the previous picture I showed you. Some of these fireplaces, especially the air-cooled ones, they're manufacturer specific, that they can only have air-cooled chimney on them. The other chimney you're going to see on these fireplaces usually is going to be a 604 chimney. For the most part, years ago, it was easy to say. All 1-inch thick chimney was 604, oil and gas only, and the 2-inch thick was our ULCS 629 high temp. But every manufacturer now has a 1-inch thick equivalent to ULCS 609. So it makes it hard to be able to tell if you're looking at a 1-inch thick chimney, is that a 604 or a high temp? Okay, if it's only good for oil and gas or high temp. And that code or standard changed in this country in the mid-'80s. In the mid-'80s, we came up with 629. You have to have a 629 chimney on a furnace, boiler, cook stove, or wood stove. Okay. The other stuff, only good for oil and gas, unless a manufacturer wants to test it with their fireplace. So we were talking before about zero clearance. It's zero clearance to these standoffs. Okay, some manufacturers have standoffs on the sides and back as well. Others will have decals on here, maintain 2 inches of airspace or whatever. And you got a lot of guys out there. I think I just kind of goofed up here. I'm going to just scoot over here. A lot of builders, they're under the impression that these standoffs, that's for shipping, right? So you can stack one pallet on top of the other. They don't understand that you cannot notch your header to fit over those standoffs. When manufacturer puts these standoffs on there, you cannot have combustibles below that. So you can't build your header up here and notch it out. This is something that you're not going to see, but some of you guys are doing new construction or renovations, home inspections for that. So if you ever see something like this, you got to make a note of it on a fireplace. But that kind of stuff you're not going to see on a fireplace. So these air-cooled chimneys, the only chimney you can put on there is the specific chimney that's required. But on some of the other chimneys or some of the other fireplaces that use solid pack chimney, you might have a fireplace that's certified with brand A, B, and C. Brand A might be a 1-inch thick chimney. Brand C might be a 2-inch thick chimney. So They don't put anything on top here, right? It's just a flat top, a little stub of pipe sticking out. And what you have to do is the installer has to make sure that they get a proper pipe adapter from the chimney manufacturer that they're using, and that has to be stuck on. So usually the instructions will say something like attach anchor plate fireplace adapter to the top of the fireplace. It's important that a tight seal be made. This must be purchased with the chimney system. And here's the thing, the reason I bring this up, for the most part, you are not going to see this as part of your day-to-day job. But I've gone out to multiple fireplaces in the past where the framing has just been on it. It's never been finished off. And I go look at it. And instead of having this on it, they got a piece of black pipe coming off the top of the fireplace with an increaser section. And they got the stainless steel chimney screwed to that. Like, that's not code compliant. You know, you need 18 inches of clearance to black pipe. And on a fireplace installation, usually you're lucky if you got a couple of inches away between the header and the edge of the chimney. So there's no way that's compliant. And I'll tell you, that was a shocker, an eye opener. And, you know, if you can't see it, you can't inspect it. So if you're going out to look at something, you say, man, what a nice job these guys did. Hey, great. I'm just going to mark down it's okay. If you can't see it, don't mark it down. Just say unable to inspect. You can't see it, you can't inspect it, right? And I'm telling you, there's all kinds of these things going on. Had a young fellow that built, got a factory built fireplace. The manufacturer's installation instructions stated that you had to use steel studs and cement board, or non-combustible board for the framing. And so what he did was he asked if Type X fire guard drywall was non-combustible. We told him no, but he talked with his chief building inspector, and the chief building inspector said, no, Type X drywall is a non-combustible. So he put the steel studs up, put the drywall on it, and this was like a 16-foot ceiling, 10-foot wide, all rock, real rock, not just glued on stuff. And he put the rock on there. And he wasn't wet certified at the time, so the homeowner called another wet guy to come in and do an inspection for their insurance company. That guy comes in, marks, he sees on the back of the chase, which is still, house was still in construction, he sees all the Type X drywall markings on there, marks down there, this is not a non-combustible board that meets the manufacturer's requirements. So next thing you know, the homeowner wants to get this guy, wet to get rid of this guy's certification because he was an idiot. Like, you figure you ask for information from the top, and when you get a chief inspector saying, yep, this is okay, he might pass it, but it's not code compliant. So you got to be careful. If you can't see it, you can't inspect it. All right. So that's the biggest thing in this business, is especially factory-built fireplaces and masonry fireplaces. How do you get in there and see anything behind the wall once it's enclosed? So you're kind of asking for trouble if you don't mark down unable to inspect. So get into space heaters. A space heater has to have ULC S627 on that label. Okay, so 627, and I want you to remember that because I'm going to show you another picture and you're going to see what's wrong with that. So a space heater, sometimes referred to as room heater, is defined as an appliance heating a room or space within which it is located without the use of ducts. For years and to this day, you'll get people come into a store saying, my house is 2,000 square feet. Give me a stove that'll heat 2,000 square feet. So they take that stove, put it in a room, and close the door, and cut a hole in their ceiling, connect it to their cold air return, and heat up the house. Because if they stuck that stove in a 10 by 20 room, they'd be sweating like pigs, right? Too much heat. No way of controlling it. So you cannot, this is a space heater. It's not a furnace. So you cannot hook it up to a duct. If you go into somebody's basement or somebody's house and you see a hood over the stove and it's hooked up to the cold air return, that's not compliant. And, in a situation like this, it probably won't be an issue. But if you had that stove in a room with a closable door and that stove's running, this cold air return, even though it has a supply register in that room, that supply register is bringing some air in, but this cold air return is taking out a heck of a lot more air. Next thing you know, that room's under negative pressure. Next thing you know, you could have smoke seeping through the joints in the pipe. You can have smoke coming in through the combustion air. that smoke is being sucked up your hood now, and you're blowing smoke through your house. Now, I've had people actually tell me, that's why we have a wood stove. We like that nice woodsy smell in the house. Well, that nice woodsy smell in a house is a problem, because that nice woodsy smell also is going to have carbon monoxide. So you're going to have higher levels of carbon monoxide in a house. That's just bad air quality if you smell wood in the house. So this is not what it was designed for. But, sorry, I keep my fingers are kind of out of whack here. But if you're doing an interpretation on a wood stove, this is kind of a typical label that you're going to have on there. So if we look at this stove, I'm just picking a number out of the top of my head on here. So let's say the back wall here, B, on the label says that this stove shall be 10.5 inches away from the wall. So if you're doing an inspection, you got your tape measure on there. If that's 10 inches, you're ½ inch out. So you got to mark it down, not compliant. If it's more than 10.5 inches, yeah, it's a compliant stove. Okay. So that's pretty much straightforward. But where the problem comes from with a lot of people is this one here, okay? This E, from the back wall to the center of the flue pipe. Some manufacturers, they put this mark on the edge of the flue pipe. Some manufacturers put it in the crosshairs. The reason they put it in the crosshair is because this is not part of the certification test. When you test a wood stove, you're testing it to ULCS 627. The flue pipe was tested to ULCS 641 or CSA B365. And then you got your chimney. It's either building code masonry or ULCS 629. So every time you do an inspection on a stove, you're doing an inspection based on 3 different standards and codes. Okay. So when a manufacturer tells you that this is to the crosshairs, that's to give you the information that if you put this stove at 10.5 inches away from the wall, this E measurement is going to be 17 inches. It's not telling you that if this is a 6-inch flue pipe and you take 3 inches off that, that means that from the edge of the pipe to the wall is 14 inches. Black pipe needs 18. And I get a lot of people say, oh, the manufacturer certified this. No, he didn't. Okay. He's putting down the information that if you do what he's certified the stove to be at 10.5 inches, your flue pipe is going to be to the center 17 or to the edge 14. So if it's any less than 18 inches on black pipe, it's not code compliant, no matter what the manufacturer has on here, because it's for informational purposes only. So right off the bat, I'm sure some of you guys are saying, well, where the heck does it say that here? Okay. You know, about 15 years ago almost, I brought that up to UL HPBA technical committee, and they all agreed. I said, you know, this is kind of fraudulent because we're not giving the customer the information. This should say for informational purposes only, but it doesn't. The problem is with all this stuff I brought up, they say, hey, we're going to have to redo our labeling program. But nobody started that because that's an expensive proposition now. Okay. But that's how you got to interpret the clearances for the manufacturer. He's going to give you what they've certified the stove to be in that enclosure. And when that stove's at that measurement, this is where the flue pipe's going to be. If it's less than 18 inches, it's not saying that you can have it at 17 or 14 because that's how we tested it. No, it's just telling you where the pipe will be, and it's up to you to protect the pipe or go double wall or whichever way you're going to be looking at it. So you got to be careful when you're doing the inspection. You got to measure that. Okay. The other thing we got on this label is our floor protection. So you notice here, it says 16, 6, and 6. I worked for a manufacturer for 3 years, and I tried to get them to change or, add to that. Say in Canada, it has to be 18 and 8. Well, this is the American standard. And the way the American standard runs is when you got your floor protection, you're measuring 16 inches in front of the stove and then 6 inches on the side. Their standard is 16 and 8, on the sides, but they measure it different than what Canadians do. In the American standard, you measure from the edge of the door opening. You don't measure from the edge of the stove. In Canada, we measure our 18 and 8 from the edge of the stove, not from the door opening. So if we look at it, got a few little regulations here. In the actual standard that the stove is tested to, in the markings, it says if installed on a combustible floor, the need to provide a non-combustible ember protector covering the area beneath the space heater and extending to at least 18 inches from the appliance on any side with a door, and at least 8 inches from each side without a door. So in Canada, you have to have 18 inches in front for your ember pad, 8 inches on the sides and rear, no matter what it says on your label. But that leads to a lot of problems because the B365 says that the manufacturer's installation instructions overrule B365. So if B365 says 18 and 8, and the manufacturer's label and brochures say 16 and 6, who are you supposed to listen to? But the one thing you got to remember is that this stove was tested to ULCS 627. Well, if it's tested to ULCS 627, this has to be on the label and in the manual, 18 and 8. So how did they not put that in there? Is that not kind of fraudulent in a little way? Okay. And I will say one thing. A couple of years ago, we started harmonizing standards between Canada and US. And the first standard we're doing that to is the insert standard. So our ULCS 627, which we'll be discussing here next, is we got 2 new standards for this. One is ULC 1390 for inserts into masonry, and then ULC 1391 for inserts into factory built fireplaces. Yeah, we're actually working on a standard to put inserts into factory built fireplaces and make them legal. Because right now, every manufacturer on the market pretty much tells you, yeah, you can put this insert into any factory built fireplace it'll physically fit into. And that don't work out at all. That's not code compliant. So we'll get into that. So I figure I'd just give you that little bit of a intro onto that. I know you're going to be waiting to listen about that. So B365 says any combustible flooring, or, you need 18 and 8 in front, just like the ULCS 627. The other thing it tells you, and this is something that we put into the amendment, the 18-inch ember pad required on any side with the door shall extend for the full width of the appliance, plus the 8 inches required on each side of the appliance without a door. So before I go there, I'll just finish off this one. Where an appliance is installed less than 8 inches from a wall, the ember pad need only extend to the base of the wall. So what we're talking about here is I need 18. So this is my ember pad, this is my floor, and this is my stove. So I need 18 inches of ember pad, non-combustible ember pad for spark protection in front of my stove. I need 8 inches on the sides and back. Okay. If this stove, and one of the issues is I've had building inspectors, say, no, you got to have an 8-inch ember pad. So if you have a certified stove that's certified at, let's say, 4-inch clearance to combustibles. So if this stove is 4 inches away from the wall, I've actually had building inspectors say, no, you got to move it away because you need an 8-inch ember pad. Well, let's look at this for a bit. This 8 and 18, that started back in the 80s. All stoves back then needed 36 or 48-inch clearance to combustibles. So if you stuck a stove in to the proper clearance, even if you reduce those clearances, you would never get closer than 12 inches to the wall. So there was never an issue of having an 8-inch ember pad. Okay. But nowadays, what manufacturers do in 4 inches or 6 inches or 5 inches, 3 inches, even some. So what B365 now says, and same with ULCS 627, is that the ember pad just runs wild. So if your stove is 4 inches from the back wall, you only have a 4-inch ember pad. I've actually had inspectors say, oh, no, we want that ember pad to go up and then bend it up 4 inches. So you still have 8 inches of sheet metal, even though you're 4 inches away from the wall. Unfortunately, it kind of gets to be a pain in the butt with interpretation sometimes, and the authority jurisdiction has the final say. So that's why we got to keep adding to the to our installation code and clarify it. The other thing that both ULC and CSA have done now, and unfortunately this was with the amendment, there's a lot of manufacturers years ago that started doing this. I need 18 inches in the front, and it's got to be 8 inches on the side. So you need this full rectangle here. But you got some manufacturers out there that are putting in or chopping off the corners within this 8 inches. Okay. So now you no longer have that protection. So what we just read here earlier is that the 18-inch ember pad required on any side of the door shall extend for the full width of the appliance, plus the 8 inches required on each side of the appliance. So that means that if you're going to chop this off, you can make a 45 on here, but this 45 has to start up here. So if you got a wider ember pad, great, but you cannot take that corner off of here in this protected area. Okay, making sense? All right. Big thing with stoves nowadays, have wood storage underneath them. This was never certified for this use. But you got all these stoves out there that have wood storage under them, and it's a pain in the butt. The manufacturers are saying that these things are certified that way. Uh, every manufacturer's installation instructions will state, keep combustibles away from the appliance. So if they got wood storage underneath the appliance, how's that keeping up with their warning that they have at the front of the manual? What the manufacturers are doing, the way I see it, is they're testing the temperature underneath here, and it's not exceeding the 117 degrees plus ambient that we're working with in a lab for temperatures. So if you're not exceeding temperatures, yeah, you can store wood underneath there. My complaint is that if you open a door here and the spark falls down and falls onto your pile, do not have a potential risk. Okay. So one of those kind of things that hopefully we can get that squared away. But here's the thing. I've never seen a manual, an installation manual that says you can put wood storage underneath there. All I've seen is pictures, the manufacturer's brochures that have wood storage underneath there. But I've never seen one that said actual wording that you can put wood storage underneath here. They'll all say you can when you talk to them, but I don't see nothing in writing. So if you're going to be doing it, like if you guys did an inspection on this, for instance, for me, I would definitely mark down a note saying you got wood storage underneath there, and it's up to your customer whether they want to accept that or not. Okay. On this one here, I would definitely mark down that that's not compliant. But when you got a stove that actually comes with that wood storage in their brochures, I would make a note saying it's got wood on top of the ember pad instead of underneath it. So the other issue that I seem to be hearing a lot about is alcove. What the heck's an alcove? So a small space, we've been making alcove approved stoves for years. It wasn't until 2020 that we actually put a definition in the ULCS 627 standard. And this is the definition. And we still don't have test protocol for how to test a stove in an alcove. And yet all the manufacturers are doing it. So it's almost like we're doing a lot of work before we have the rules for it. But that's the way this industry works. So a small space in a room formed by one part of the wall being further back than the parts on each side and within which the ceiling may be lower than the room ceiling. A recess, typically in the wall of a room, in which the surfaces are made of combustible material. So for manufacturer's instructions, I've never seen a manufacturer that asks for less than a 6-foot high ceiling. Usually they're about 7-foot ceilings for an alcove. So this would be an alcove. This would not. Okay. And yet you get customers telling you, oh, look up inside there, that the ceiling's up at 8 feet. So it meets the alcove requirement. No, you cannot have a front on there. It's got to be a wall that jots out on 3 sides and it's open on the front. I've actually had people say, well, we can put we can cut a couple of brick out here, put fans in there so that it's sucking the air out of the, that's trapped in there. Yeah, but what happens when the power goes off? How's the fans going to work then when you need it the most? So, unfortunately, you're going to get a lot of customers out there that want to argue with you with your interpretation. We're not there to argue with people. We're just marking down what we see and go from there. But don't let somebody try to convince you that your interpretation is wrong and you just mark it off that it's okay just because you want to get out of there. Okay. This one here, you can see that these people aren't pigs, but there's a lot of debris around here. That's because the side of this house burnt off with this particular appliance. This appliance was 6 years old, and you had a wet inspection done on it. And when I was looking at the insurance questionnaire, it said flue pipe clearance from left side greater than 18 inches, right side greater than 18 inches, the back side, he marked down UTI. Like, you got a tape measure right there. What's your clearance, right? Didn't mark it. But does something look weird about this piece of stainless here? Okay. We've had people going into these people's new house for a long time and saying everything's fine. And so I look at this picture, and first thing I asked is, what the heck is this? Okay. This stainless steel, this is an ICC chimney, ICC XL chimney on top of that stove, going all the way up through a chase. Well, ICC had an adjustable section of stainless steel chimney. What the installers here did was took half of it off So you had a long extension of stainless steel pipe. Right up underneath here, a few inches above this arch, is a piece of OSB. And what they did was they cut a 7-inch hole in the OSB and they put this 6-inch pipe through it. And the outer shell is 2 inches bigger. So the outer shell is sitting on that OSB. So the least of my worries would be 18 inches of clearance here, here in the backside. What about here? You only got 1 inch from the pipe. And when the lawyer asked me to do a description of what I would do if I went into this house, I proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the fire was not the cause of the sweep, but I did put in there the next one will be, because how he could have swept this thing for 6 years and never made a notion or a notice or mention that there was OSB right above here, no supports, uh, improper ceiling height. There's nothing about this install that's correct. So you guys don't want to be the guys that go into somebody's house like this and say, yep, looks all right, check it off. And then they have a problem, because then the insurance company, and I'm finding insurance companies are getting more and more specific. Well, I shouldn't say specific. They want to have anybody that was involved with the case as defendants, because they're looking for the guys with the deepest pockets. And with this one here, everybody was looking at the fire cause in the chase. Nobody noticed this stuff when they were doing their inspection. So you got to make a thorough inspection. You got to do research when you are doing a solid fuel burning appliance inspection. You got to know what the manufacturer's installation instructions are specifying. You got to know what it is that they require, what kind of parts and pieces and what kind of clearances. You got to be familiar with parts 921 and 922 of the building code for masonry fireplace. You got to know what the thicknesses and the clearances are for brick and chimney and firebox and smoke chamber. It can get to be a pain in the butt, but if you're going out there and charging somebody for an inspection and you're not familiar with codes and standards and something goes wrong, what happens now? Like, you're a professional, you're charging for it. How come you don't know the information? And I've seen a lot of guys in court hadn't got a clue. Well, I didn't realize that, Your Honor. Well, you're a professional. That's not a very good excuse. Matter of fact, that makes you look guilty. Okay. So you got to make sure you're looking at it. So if you're looking at a wood stove, one of the things that I hear a lot of, I actually had one inspector say, well, the lady asked them to open the door on the stove and see if it's okay. No, we don't open the doors in a level 1 inspection. Like, a level 1 inspection for wet is an inspection done, a visual inspection done without the use of tools or ladders. What tool do you need to open that door to look inside it? And in this particular case, it cost her a lot of money, because she had a sweep come in to sweep the chimney, and he says, you can't use this stove. The whole backside's got a big crack in it. If the guy had opened the door, he would have seen the crack. Mind you, he looked at the label on the back of the stove. How did he miss the big crack in it? So I'll just show you some examples of some stoves that all you have to do is open the door, and you would have made a comment. If you open a door on a stove and you see cracks like this, is that the way it came from the factory? So is that stove considered certified still? But, if you don't catch that when somebody wants to buy a house and they buy that, and then a sweep comes in and says, well, that stove's no good, you shouldn't be using it, to be a pain. How about these air tubes? Right? Like, at the very least, make a mention that these things are kind of hooped. I have a lot of guys say, well, I'm not a metallurgist, so I don't know if it's okay or not. Well, all you got to ask yourself, is this the way it came from the factory? Because if it didn't, then it no longer meets the standard. Okay. Here's the latest one that I had, and unfortunately it was a home inspector, home wet inspector. He went into this house and he told the people, yep, everything's fine. This is a Pacific Energy. This is a stainless steel baffle plate. It's bent in the middle. That's totally, totally useless, not compliant, won't do its job anymore. And to add insult to injury, this is what the door looked like. And he said, oh yeah, gasket's fine. Like, what? Like, from what planet would anybody look at that and say, yep, satisfactory? And unfortunately, with that particular case, that inspector had to, make a claim to you guys' insurance to pay for that damage. And I can't remember what it was, but it was in the $12,000, $15,000 range. because he goofed, right? So if you're writing something down, you got to make sure you're specific, even if it just seems minimal. Like, what, a pain in the butt, I'm going to make a comment on this. You got to cover your butt. You make a note on what it is that you're seeing. Okay. Otherwise, unfortunately, society nowadays, nobody wants to take responsibility for their actions. If something's wrong, they want somebody else to pay for it. And you're the last guy to touch that system. Who do you think they're coming after to pay for it? Okay. So, got to be careful how you're doing an inspection. So then we'll get into inserts. A fireplace insert's a space heating appliance intended for installation within or mostly within the fuel burning space of a masonry. And notice how I crossed off and highlighted factory built. There is no standard for inserts into factory built fireplaces, even though all the manufacturers state you can put an insert into any factory built fireplace that it'll physically fit into. Never been a standard for that. We're working on that standard now. We're in the process of harmonizing the Canada and the US, so we got a standard. The Americans have never had an insert standard, period. Okay, at least in Canada, we've had a ULCS 628 standard. The standards for their certification in the US, they've always been certified under UL 1482. The UL 1482 is our equivalent of a freestanding space heater to ULCS 627. So they've never had an insert standard. So it's been over 2 years in the working now, and we're just in the process now, or ULC is just in the process of sending out RFPs. So yesterday at our meeting, we started putting a list together of what we want from a test lab, what kind of testing that we expect for having an insert into a factory built fireplace. But an insert is ULCS 628. A wood stove is ULC S627. So the thing about an insert is in B365 says when an insert or hearth mount stove is installed in a fireplace, the fireplace and the chimney shall be in accordance with provincial or territorial regulations. In other words, the fireplace has to be compliant with the building code. So if you went into somebody's house and you saw that, would you consider that compliant for an insert? Okay. You can't have any combustibles. This one here, to add insult to injury, it looks like they used to have a wood stove connected up here. So that's why this hole in the brick. And that's all full of insulation and combustible. You can't have combustibles touching brick. So just to give you an idea, like we'll get into here in a sec, but this stove, right? So an insert has to meet ULCS 628. This stove is ULCS 627. So if I want to run or connect a pipe using my existing chimney, that label has to have ULCS 627 on it. This label here, if we look at it, notice here it says ULCS 627 on this stove. This is a freestanding stove. This is not an insert. So this installation is not compliant. But if you go into this place, I mean, everything looks fine. It's a concrete floor, the brickwork's all concrete and granite and stuff like this. Everything looks fine there, right? Vented through the chimney, no problem. But the thing is, the building code specifically states in 922.10 that an insert or hearth mount shall meet the requirements of ULCS 628. So if that says 627, it can't vent through the throat of the fireplace. So you got to keep that in mind, right? And that's where the label's important. We actually took a certification away from a wet guy. I mean, he was ready to retire anyways, but he put two inserts into, sold two inserts to some people, two houses. These people had a wood stove in there, an old wood stove and a Selkirk chimney. So they wanted something fancy. They wanted an enclosed fireplace. So this guy took the two stoves out, took the flue pipe out, and put two inserts marked ULC. It said ULC S628 on there, insert, right? He put those on the existing combustible hearth. He had his framer frame it up and drywall everything. How he made the connection from the top of the insert to that Selkirk chimney, I have no idea. But basically two fires. And that was reported to WET in a letter of complaint by the forensic investigator. So when we had a chat with that guy, he says, like, did you install a stove or an insert? Well, I don't know. Well, you marked it on your report, 628. It's an insert. How do you enclose an insert in combustibles, in drywall? So, you know, when you go out and look at a job, especially for you guys, because a home inspector, like if I'm selling a house, what's the first thing the realtor asks me to do? Clean it up, paint it, fix it, right? Put lipstick on a pig. So unfortunately, a lot of you guys are going in there to do that visual inspection. You don't know what's hidden behind the walls, right? And you're marking down okay. And this really bothers me with Mike Holmes. He never ever on his TV show has ever said that an inspector is just doing a visual inspection. When he goes into a house and he starts ripping walls and ceilings out, how many walls and ceilings does he have to rip out before he finds something wrong? Okay. And I'll tell you, I can go to 100 houses that were inspected today, finalized, and I'll guarantee you, if I start ripping walls and ceilings out, I'm going to see something wrong, uh, minor and major. So when you guys are doing an inspection, you're doing a visual inspection, but you still got to mark down, I can't see this, therefore I can't inspect it, right? If you can't see it, you can't inspect it. So it's one of those kind of things that you got to be really, really careful of. So when it comes to putting an insert into a factory-built fireplace, when you look at a fireplace, I mean, just look at this thing. Like, if you're doing an inspection of a fireplace, if you're doing a level 1 visual wet inspection, for instance, you have to see behind the faceplate. So if you don't need tools or ladders to remove a faceplate, you should be able to do it. But I'll tell you one thing, if you can remove a faceplate, but there's a chance of you doing damage to yourself or the structure or the house, don't take it off. At the very least, use something, use a little inspection camera, stick that behind the faceplate and have a look around. If you see something like this chimney is not even connected to the top of the insert. So do you not think that that's a possibility of having an incident there? Or this one, here's a fireplace. All these factory-built fireplaces, they're going to have 3 walls on them, okay? 3 structure walls. On this one here, the installers ripped out 2 of them and the floor. So if you think about it, for one, you're taking out 2/3 of the structure of this fireplace. What's supporting the chimney? 2, this thing here has a zero clearance listing, like some people think about. So if you take out 2/3 of the protection, how much more heat are you getting to the walls? Not a good idea. So not only the left side, but the right side's all been ripped off, plus the floor. Plus, on top of it, what's this stainless steel thing? It looks like stainless steel, right? That's your chimney connector. So if we look at it, when you got an insert, this is what an insert's supposed to look like in a masonry fireplace. You got to have your cap, your flashing, your stainless steel liner, and your insert. So everything, all the components you use have to be certified by the manufacturer. Everything that's installed is a system. This is where it ends up being a mega issue for you guys and anybody else that inspects. For the simple reason, let's say I showed you a chunk of stainless steel liner. If you're looking at this liner sticking down a chimney, would you be able to tell whose brand of chimney, of liner that is? And yet, you are supposed to know that this one here is, let's say, FlexMaster. So that way, when you look at the cap, it's going to have a FlexMaster cap, a FlexMaster that. Every component that we put into a fireplace has to be certified as a system. And I'll tell you, once the installer sticks it in, unless he marks it on his invoice, what brand of product he's put in there, there's not a hope in heck that you guys will know. There's one manufacturer, FlexMaster, they actually have Z-Flex stamped on this wide section. Other than that, there's not a hope in heck that you know whose liner this is. So how do you mark that down on your inspection report? Yeah, you're going to say it's got a liner in there, but you got to mark down UTI as far as whose liner it is, right? You can't see it, can't inspect it. But everything has to be a component. And for you guys here in BC, especially, we've had a lot of issues over the last number of years with regards to these transition boxes. So this is this here is a transition box. So what you got here is that this insert plopped into that factory-built fireplace. You got to hook up a liner to it. But the problem is there's no room to put a liner in, and you got to offset it over. The thing is, if an installer buys an insert from a manufacturer and a liner from the liner manufacturer and gets this offset box or transition box from the manufacturer, he's under the impression that this is a certified system. There haven't been any certified systems for years. So all of a sudden, this all started in South Island, Victoria area, where the inspectors were concerned. They were concerned about a lot of things. So a bunch of manufacturers jumped on stream. Yep. And started making certified systems. Okay, so you got some certified systems, adjustable systems. This one here is a a homemade one. And why would you put insulation around there like this? This foil tape. How long do you think it's going to last on your liner? But if you don't look inside behind the faceplate, you're never going to see any of these. And this is a big concern for the building department. They figure that when you have these transition boxes, these offset boxes, that's a place for creosote to sit, and it could ignite. So if you're looking inside the faceplate and you see damaged liners like this, got to make a note of it. A lot of guys are installing them, and they figure, oh yeah, no problem, this will still last. Problem is, stainless steel liners, to make them, they start off as flat sheet metal stainless steel, and they go through rollers, and they get crimped up like that with the corrugations. And then when you get a crease like that in there, you're actually cracking the brittle stainless. And then you run a brush in there after a few years of hot, cold, they'll actually fall apart. So none of this is compliant. Okay. Okay, so I got a few minutes to go here. I'll just run through the masonry. Do I have 4 minutes, or am I over, Kendall? Okay. So a fuel burning device constructed mostly of brick, block, or stone, which is used primarily for decorative or aesthetic purposes rather than space heating. These fireplaces, a lot of people are under the impression they put their wood in there, they can heat their homes with them. They may heat the space, the living room that it's in, but for the most part, these things can suck up to 450 cubic feet a minute of air out of the house. So you might be hot in that room, but the rest of the house is freezing because you're sucking all that air. And that air is coming into your house, gets heated by your furnace, and then it gets shot up your chimney. So it can actually be more expensive to use this fireplace to heat your home than to use your furnace. Okay. So there's a couple of these, and I said before about the ULCS 639. This here is a masonry fireplace, and you're pretty much guaranteed that this has a metal box in there instead of a masonry firebox. You got cold air in here and hot air ducts here. So you got a fire in that metal box. That fire heats up the metal box and the air behind it. That air behind it gets heated up. It gets shot out these two hot air ducts. More cold air comes in there. So you have that continuous convection airflow. And really common out here in the West is the ones with the 3 tubes in them. Okay. So these have to be certified. This one here has a label, certified to ULC S639 or S629. Okay. This is what it looks like from inside. Some of them, the bigger ones, got 4 tubes in there, but you'll find that the further east you go, the less and less you see of these, the more and more you see of these ones. Okay, with these louvers on there. The one with the 3 tubes, you're probably going to see a little rectangular hole in there with the vents coming through. Okay. Here's a problem. When you have these steel boxes, anything you have with fire is going to produce creosote. Wood creosote is sulfurous. So when you have water and sulfur, you're producing sulfuric acid, and no matter how thick this box is, over time, it's going to rot out. This is a perfect example. Like if you got you got a rancher, single story rancher, masonry chimney, and there's no rain cap on top. The water comes down, drops in behind this unit, and 15, 20 years is all you need to rot this thing out. So if you're going in to look at a fireplace and you got those louvers or those 2 tubes, don't say, yep, fireplace looks fine. Look on the bottom, on the floor, for instance. If you look along the floor on the inside of the house, let's see if I got, no, yeah. So if you look on here and you see that that's rusted, it's a heck of a lot worse rusted on the backside of it. Okay. So you might want to say, hey, you got a problem because now you're sucking a lot of air in for the air that's supposed to come in and go out again. Okay. Okay. So that's about it. So do the rest for another time.
Awesome, Ziggy. Thanks so much for coming out today. That was a fantastic presentation.
Thanks
Great.
for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks a lot. I'm gonna turn the recording off now.